In 1947, Tim Robbins portrays Andy Dufresne, a banker from Maine who is convicted of murdering his wife and her lover, a golf pro. Due to Maine's lack of the death penalty, he is sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in the brutal Shawshank prison. Despite Andy's insistence on his innocence, his cold and calculating demeanor leads everyone to believe he is guilty. In the meantime, Morgan Freeman's character, Ellis Boyd Redding, commonly known as Red, is being interviewed for parole after serving 20 years at Shawshank for murder. Despite his exemplary behavior, Red's parole is denied, which he takes in stride. Red is known as the local smuggler who can acquire anything within reason for the prisoners. During the arrival of new inmates, Red and his friends place bets on who will have a nervous breakdown on their first night. Red places a significant bet on Andy. On the first night, a newly arrived overweight inmate nicknamed Fat Ass breaks down and cries, allowing Haywood to win the bet. However, the celebration is short-lived when the chief guard, Byron Hadley, brutally beats the man for making noise. Meanwhile, Andy remains calm and collected. The following morning, the inmates learn that Fat Ass died in the infirmary, and Andy inquires about the man's name only to be put down by Haywood. About a month later, Andy approaches Red, having heard of his ability to obtain things. He asks Red to find him a rock hammer, which he claims he needs for his hobby of rock collecting and sculpting. Red questions Andy's intentions, but Andy dismisses his concerns. Red agrees to place the order and warns Andy about the sexually aggressive group of prisoners known as the Sisters, particularly their leader, Boggs, who has a crush on Andy. Although other prisoners consider Andy a really cold fish, Red sees something in him and likes him from the start. Red believes that Andy intends to use the hammer to engineer an escape in the future, but when he sees the hammer's actual size, he understands why Andy laughed and puts the thought aside. During his first 2 years in prison, Andy spends most of his time in the laundry or fighting off the Sisters. Although he persistently resists and fights them, Andy is regularly beaten and raped but does not speak up. When a work detail is announced, Red arranges for Andy and some of their mutual friends to be assigned to the job, giving them a break from their usual duties. While on the job, Andy overhears Hadley complaining about having to pay taxes on an inheritance. Andy, utilizing his banking expertise, offers to help Hadley shelter his money from the IRS by turning it into a one-time gift for his wife. In exchange for assistance with the paperwork, Andy requests cold beers for his fellow inmates while they work. Although Hadley initially threatens to throw Andy off the roof, he eventually agrees and provides the working inmates with cold beers before the job is completed. Red notes that Andy may have engineered the privilege to gain favor with the guards as much as with his fellow inmates, but he also believes that Andy did it to feel normal again. While watching a movie, Andy makes an unusual demand to Red, asking for actress Rita Hayworth. Red agrees to help, and as he exits the theater, Andy is confronted once again by the Sisters but is able to talk his way out of being assaulted. However, he is still brutally beaten by them, leaving him hospitalized for a month. Meanwhile, Boggs is punished with a week in solitary confinement for the same incident. Warden Norton takes notice of Andy's skills and has him transferred to the prison library, where he provides financial advising to the guards and expands the library through letter-writing campaigns. When Brooks, an aging inmate who has become institutionalized after spending 50 years in prison, is about to be paroled, he becomes agitated and Andy is able to talk him out of harming Haywood. However, Brooks is unable to adjust to life outside of prison and ultimately takes his own life. Despite receiving funds and donations for the library, Andy continues to push for more, eventually playing Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro over the prison's PA system and landing himself in solitary confinement for 2 weeks. He finds solace in the music, highlighting the power of hope in a place like Shawshank, while Red disagrees, believing that hope is a dangerous thing. Their disagreement causes tension between the two. Red's parole hearing comes up soon after and he realizes he's been in prison for 30 years. He repeats the same words he used 10 years earlier, but with no enthusiasm, and his parole is rejected again. Andy gives him a harmonica to commemorate his 30 years, and Red reciprocates with a giant Marilyn Monroe poster for Andy's 10-year milestone. About 4 years after the Mozart incident, the state senate realizes that paying Andy off won't get rid of him, so they allow him a budget of $500 per year to build a prison library. Andy wisely makes deals with book clubs and charities to create the best prison library in the state and names it after Brooks. With the library's expansion and more materials, Andy mentors inmates who want to receive their high school diplomas so they can get a decent job once they're released. Meanwhile, Warden Norton profits from Andy's knowledge by putting prison inmates to work on public projects, which he wins by outbidding other contractors. Andy launders the money by setting up several accounts in several banks, along with several investments, using the fake identity of Randall Stevens. If anyone investigates the scheme, they will chase a man who only exists on paper. Andy shares the details with Red, noting that he had to go to prison to learn how to be a crook. In 1965, Tommy, a young prisoner serving time for breaking and entering, becomes friends with Andy and Red. Andy suggests that Tommy should consider another line of work because he seems to be not so good at theft. The suggestion prompts Tommy to ask Andy to help him earn his high school equivalency diploma. Though Tommy is a good student, he becomes frustrated during the exam and crumples up the paper, throwing it in the trash. Andy retrieves it and sends it in anyway. Tommy later tells Andy and Red a story about a former cellmate who boasted about killing a man and his lover. The woman's husband, a banker, had gone to prison for the murders. Andy meets with the warden, hoping to get a new trial with Tommy as a witness. When he refuses to reveal the money laundering schemes he set up for Norton over the years, the warden orders him to solitary confinement for a month. The inmates discuss the punishment and realize that Andy may be innocent. Tommy receives a letter announcing that he passed the exam and now owns a high school diploma. Later, the warden asks Tommy if he would be willing to testify on Andy's behalf. Tommy agrees, but the warden orders Hadley to shoot him dead. During his visit to Andy in solitary, the warden informs him that Tommy attempted to escape and was shot by Hadley. Andy doesn't believe the story and tells Norton that he won't work for him anymore. Norton threatens to close the library, burn the books, and move Andy to a dangerous part of the prison with violent criminals if he doesn't continue working for him. Andy is sent back to solitary for a month to consider his options. When Andy is released from solitary, he discusses his wife and his desire to live in Zihuatanejo, Mexico with Red. However, Red declines the invitation to join him, citing his own despair and the fate of Brooks. Andy then asks Red to retrieve an item from a specific hayfield in Buxton, Maine if he ever gets parole, but refuses to disclose what it is. Red agrees, but becomes concerned that Andy may be contemplating suicide after asking for a rope. That night, Andy is asked to shine Norton's shoes and put his suit in for dry cleaning. The following morning, Andy is missing from his cell and a search ensues. Norton discovers that Andy's shoes are missing and becomes increasingly suspicious. Red denies any knowledge of Andy's plans, but Norton tears down Andy's poster to reveal a tunnel that Andy had spent years digging with his rock hammer. Flashbacks narrated by Red reveal that Andy had been secretly digging the tunnel for years, concealing the dirt in his pockets during his daily walks. During a thunderstorm, he wore Norton's clothes and escaped through the tunnel, using a rope to carry his belongings. He emerged outside the prison walls after crawling through a sewage pipe. His prison clothes, a bar of soap, and his worn-out rock hammer were found by the search team. As the warden and Red uncover Andy's clever escape plan, he makes his way to the Maine National Bank in Portland using his fake identity, Randall Stevens. With the necessary documentation, Andy closes Norton's account and walks away with a cashier's check for $370,000. Before he leaves, he sends a package containing Norton's accounting books, his written confessions, and testimony to the Portland Daily Bugle newspaper. Meanwhile, the Maine State Police and reporters storm Shawshank Prison, and Hadley is arrested for Tommy's murder. As Norton realizes that Andy has outsmarted him and the police arrive at his office with an arrest warrant, he opens his safe to find Andy's Bible with a note acknowledging that salvation lay within. The Book of Exodus reveals that Andy had cut out the pages in the shape of his rock hammer. Norton commits suicide as the police knock on his door. Red receives a postcard with no message from Fort Hancock, Texas, which he takes as a sign that Andy has made it to Mexico. Red reminisces with his buddies about Andy's escape and feels depressed at the thought of missing his friend. At his next parole hearing, Red regrets his past actions, acknowledges his rehabilitation, and is granted parole. After leaving the halfway house, Red follows Andy's instructions and finds the stone wall with the black stone, a large sum of cash, and instructions to find him in Zihuatanejo. Red violates his parole, carves a new message in the wooden beam, and takes a bus to Fort Hancock before crossing into Mexico. He finds Andy on the beach, and they are finally reunited after a long journey.